Okay, so welcome to the final of this series. Today's session is on purposeful feedback, and we have my friend and colleague Rachel Forsyth from the University of Lund in Sweden, who's going to talk us through that. Just before we go to Rachel, I just wanted to highlight the this QR code, which is for feedback, and hopefully we can get that into the chat as well. So if you haven't, not the feedback subject of the webinar, but feedback on the webinar and the series itself. I'd just like to also remind people of the digital certificate of achievement that we've made available, with the intention of participants being able to enhance their professional practice by drawing on the pedagogical ideas that have been discussed in the series, developing critical reflection skills, and thinking about what kind of development actions you might undertake for your ongoing learning and professional development. So we're nearing the deadline for submission, which is the 15th of July. We have asked participants to reflect on their learning by participating in or watching at least five of the 7 webinars. There is a fee which covers the administration costs for what we're doing, but you can find all the details in the Certificate of Achievement Handbook. Again, we'll put the link into the chat in a moment, and there is an application form there also. The application deadline and the payment deadline are the same, 15th of July, and we will endeavour to ensure the certificate is issued by the 31st of August. If by any chance we feel in the assessment process that resubmission is required, the deadline for that would be the 15th of September, and final certificate issue would be on the 15th of October. But the important date there is the 15th of July, and hopefully people will be keen to participate. I have had a look, and people have already submitted intentions, so that's really good. Now I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to hand over to Rachel, who is going to talk for 25 minutes, half an hour, and then we will have some discussion. So if you do have any questions during Rachel's presentation, if you can put those into the chat, and I'll see if I can raise those. And I'll also be inviting people to ask questions when we get to that part of the session. So Rachel, fingers crossed, and I'm handing over to you.
Okay, so let's start talking about this. And it's really meant to be a provocation for you to think about how you can move forward with feedback. It can be really challenging in distance education to think about feedback. Sometimes the person that writes the course and plans the assessments isn't the person who's giving the feedback. Sometimes you might be giving feedback having not been involved in planning the course, obviously the other way around, and not really sure what the intentions were. But what I would like you to think about today is what you take away with you. What kinds of things can you do in the situation that you're in to improve the feedback, from designing it to giving it back to the students? And so that's the focus that I'd like to take today. So try and be as purposeful as possible. But the first thing I'd like you to do, thinking about this, is start thinking about what's feedback for. Then we'll look at a little bit about generative AI, not too much, we don't have time today. And then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for the discussion. So just a tiny bit about me. I work at the University of Lund in Sweden, in the south part of Sweden, where I notice everyone's talking about their sunny weather. As is very typical for southern Sweden at this time of year. It's quite nice outside, but the clouds do come over fairly often. We are kind of sitting in the Baltic Sea here, so we get a bit of wind. Before that, though, I worked in the UK for a long time at Manchester Metropolitan University, and I'm now working mostly with generative AI and assessment, and obligatory to advertise any books on the right hand side. But what I'm going to say today comes very much from the top book, Confident Assessment in Higher Education. And unfortunately, it was published 3 weeks before ChatGPT was released, so there is no mention of generative AI. but I sort of stand by the processes in it, which are just intended to help you to think about the context of your assessment and design effectively. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. But first of all, just privately, I would like you to think just for a few seconds about the best feedback that you've ever received. So what works for you in terms of feedback? And hopefully you've thought of something. I find it's quite difficult when you ask people about their experiences of assessment, the best they've ever had. They find it quite hard not to jump to the worst they've ever had, but hopefully you have thought of it. And now just think a little bit about how you defined best. What made it best? And then just think about the context of it and who gave it to you. How did that make it better? So we don't need to share any of this. It's just for you to reflect on in terms of what we're going to do next. Okay, so keep thinking about that, what the best feedback was. And it leads us naturally to the question of what is it for? So when you're thinking about that feedback experience you have and why it was good, what do you think the purpose of it was? And in the literature about feedback, there's a lot of material being written about feedback, particularly in the last 10 years, and it's of really good quality. And even longer, like I've got one from 2010 there. But generally speaking, the agreement is it's to support improvement. So we give feedback to support improvement. I think it's a very simple definition, and it's a good one to focus on. So why are we doing it? We're trying to improve things. And what makes it good? Thinking about what I asked you to think about as well. And you won't be at all surprised, because this is true for most things that happen in education. It depends. We know that students are influenced by their previous experiences. So if they've had bad experiences of feedback, their expectations may be quite low. And they may find it quite difficult to interpret your feedback because they've had previous poor experiences. So we also know that feedback can be very emotive. They may expect something that isn't effective. And we'll probably come back to this, but justifying the grade is not a really good use of feedback, but they may be expected to see that. And so there could be a clash between what they expect and what we think effective feedback looks like. All the references are at the end. Sorry, you don't need to kind of hunt around for them just now. And some facts that we know about, or some facts, if anything's factual in education, it needs to be brief. Students don't read or can't act on long feedback usually. Of course, you might give several pieces of short feedback, for example, on a dissertation, but it needs to be relatively brief. It needs to be relevant, and relevance is a moving target for you. It depends on the assignment itself, but it also depends what the students want to do in the future, where they're planning to go. If you are teaching, for example, on a UK Open University course where there are sets of modules that people take one after the other, and you don't really know what they're going to do next, it may not be relevant to give very specific feedback which relates to something you hope they might take next, if you see what I mean. So it needs to be relevant to them in their context. And it can be difficult for us to judge that, particularly in a distance education scenario. So if you're not sure about what would be relevant, it's always a good idea to ask some of the students themselves what would be relevant for them. And then I think how we need to explain what we're doing. And hedging language is a very British phrase, but hedging language is something that British people do a lot, including me. We preface a lot of our feedback with phrases like, "Oh, I think that many people might," and it's hedging language. And certainly for people whose first language isn't the one that you're writing in, this can be quite confusing. So plain language is really important. It's always a good tip, particularly when you're working with students who've got different experiences of higher education. So all those things are in the literature as good in terms of feedback. And you could think back to what I asked you about and consider whether any of those things applied in the feedback that you enjoyed getting. This is a very old piece of work now by modern standards, but I don't think it ages badly at all. And it gives you 7 points to think about. I'm not going to read them all out, but just so that you have them. This is good practice. So that doesn't mean good feedback in itself, but it's practices that should work. And you can pick one of those and think about what you do now and how you could develop it, for example. That's one way to get started with these. So
hello dear. I've got a card for you. Anyway.
Then we've got the question of what would students do with that feedback when we give it to them? And like everything else, it depends. And if feedback is just an add-on to is something that just kind of gets stuck on the end of the course and isn't planned at the same time as the course, it can be that students find it very hard to know what to do with it. So again, looking at the research on this, they need to have awareness of what it's meant to be doing. They need to want to deal with it, and they need to know they can. They need to feel that it's useful to them. So dialogic feedback is in the literature very popular, where you can explain feedback to a student, they can come back and ask questions and so on. It's not always something that we can practice, and again, in a distance education situation, that can be quite difficult. If you're designing the course and planning what kind of feedback will be given, it's difficult for you to know how a tutor might be working with a student further down the line, or if a human is going to be working with them further down the line, or if it's an entirely self-study course like a massive open online course, a MOOC. You have to sort of guess what will be happening with it. So it does depend on that, and students first need to read it. I used to, in the old days, before we had digital submissions, I used to collect photographs of piles of work outside teachers' offices waiting to be collected, but I couldn't find any of them, so I asked Copilot to generate one for me last week, and it's pretty accurate, to be honest, apart from the lecturer office being written on the door. In the old days, when we didn't worry too much about data security either, so we just let people leave personal information like assignments sitting outside a door with all the comments on them. But first they do need to read it, and this is part of how we prepare them to use the feedback. So the students need awareness and agency, as Winston et al. Have said. How do we get them that? So we need to plan this in earlier. When you get your feedback, it might not be, you might not have done very well. It doesn't matter. We give you feedback so that you can improve, remembering that feedback is to support improvement. So again, I'm going quickly here through some so we can have a discussion. And so what's the impact of generative AI on feedback? I mean, the short answer is, from a research perspective, we don't yet know. But I've been with a colleague, Miriam Vesma. We have been running focus groups with teachers and students in mixed groups, talking about trust and how it's built and maintained between teachers and students. And the most recent phase of the work has been about the particular impact of generative AI. So I don't have time to talk about all the research today, but I thought it would be useful to look at this model that we've put together, or this set of ideas we've put together is a more accurate phrase. And because I think you can apply it to feedback too, and I'll show you how we do that. But without having to go back too much to explain how this is done, we've got some guidance here, which is in the form of what teachers might do to encourage students to trust them. So there's a section on cognition, by which we mean the knowledge and skills that the teachers have. So these examples here. So you can trust me, I'm your teacher. You can trust that I know what I'm talking about in the subject, but also that I know why you need to learn this now and why I've put it at this point in the course, and so on. We have a section on affect. This is from some previous work we've done on trust. So affect, the impact that you're having on the students. Now, I don't expect any teachers to go out and say to their students, I really care about you and your learning, or not in England anyway, that would not fit very well with our culture. might work in some other places. But you can demonstrate this, and certainly students in the past have said to us that when they really feel that a teacher wants them to succeed, then their trust is much, much higher. I'm sorry, I don't have too much time to talk about that today, but you get the idea. Similarly, that we will show that we have values and we support them. I'm going to just keep going on this. So that's one side of it. Trust that the student should trust the teacher, and the teacher needs to make themselves trustworthy by demonstrating these things, not necessarily using exactly this language, but in the way that they do things and in the support they give the students. But it's also really important that the teacher shows that they trust the students. And this is something with generative AI that we've found that students really worry about. They don't feel trusted if a teacher says, don't use AI, I'll know if you do, I'm going to check everything. I don't trust you anymore, and I'm going to pull you into the class to do all of your assessments. Now, again, we don't have time to talk too much today about balancing the validity and the security of assessments. We do need to make sure that students have done work themselves, but we don't have to lose our trusting relationship with them to do that. And some of the ways teachers can show this are shown on the right. I'll just let you read those. And again, this is not about using these exact words. We've just summarized things so we could fit them onto one slide. But demonstrating that you have this trust and that your course is designed for students to be able to demonstrate these things is effective, we think. So I'm just going to move on and show this how this might apply in terms of feedback. I should have taken all these off. I didn't. So in terms of the cognition, the skills and knowledge, so feedback needs to correct mistakes. We can't let mistakes go if things are wrong. And in terms of generative AI, we know that mistakes can be made. I think factual mistakes will become less common, but contextual mistakes are likely to persist because these are not thinking machines, they are text prediction machines. And using statement banks in feedback can be really helpful, so that you don't have to think of a new sentence every time the 10th time you've seen a mistake, you've just got something ready. And statement banks are something that generative AI could be used to generate, and I'll explain a bit more about that in a minute. So I'm just trying to provoke you into thinking about what you think is acceptable and not. Taking another example, the affect. Feedback needs to be constructive and kind and actionable, and it's really hard to write that kind of feedback when you are grading many different assignments. It's hard to keep yourself being original, and again, statement banks can be really useful because it's already written in a helpful and constructive way. For example, something that many of us will have written in our time. I'm trying to think of a kind way to put it. So the not kind way would be referencing is wrong. A kind way to put that would be, in your next assignment, you need to think about, you should get some advice from the library on structuring your references in a standard way. I don't know, I was a poor example, but it's hard to write all that when you're grading lots of things. So something where you can pull out a statement from a bank of statements can be useful. Then feedback was produced transparently. If you use a statement bank, explain why. And did you use generative AI? Yes, maybe you did. And you can explain why you did that and why you think it's acceptable. And I'm not in any way condoning or encouraging the use of generative AI if you don't want to use it. I'm just literally thinking about what's happening in the presence of AI. And from a values point of view, we can provide opportunities to discuss the feedback. So if you can save some time generating this feedback in different ways, simpler ways, having statement banks and so on, perhaps that will free up some time for a discussion afterwards. So this idea of dialogic feedback, or you could provide generic advice on using the feedback. Many of you missed a part of the question that I asked, and I suggest that you go and do X in response to that. Maybe we can set up an extra class. So just ways to try to show that you are caring about that and that you understand that it may be interpreted differently. From a student perspective, we can write feedback which encourages them to work independently. So we correct mistakes, but we don't necessarily provide all the answers again. And again, that might lead to some dialogue. We're giving opportunities to discuss. We've already talked about that. And here I'm straying into assessment or grading. But if we're considering both the process of producing the piece of work and the product itself, then feedback can talk about both of those things. So we don't want to see something that says, I can see that you worked very hard. We don't grade how hard people work. But you could say something like, I can see that you found, or you did find a lot of relevant sources here. There was one that is very germane to this that I think you should look at as well. So we're looking at the process, but as well as the product, as what the final part is. And you could use generative AI, or students could, to get advice. We'll look at that in the next slide. And the final thing on identity is, especially if you've got very diverse groups of students, but acknowledging the context that students were working in, if you can. It depends on the type of assessment, but that's one way that could be done. So these are just ideas. You might have much better ones of your own, which we can pick up in the discussion. So I'm just going to round up this little part by just talking about this. How could we use generative AI ourselves? I've touched on that already. As I said, this doesn't constitute endorsement for using generative AI products, by which I mean tools such as ChatGPT or Copilot or Claude or Gemini, the most commonly used ones in higher education. But how could this be used? Are there any benefits or problems that we might have? Possibly, from a teacher's point of view, we could, as I've said, generate banks of statements. So you can do that by taking your grading criteria and asking a product like ChatGPT or Copilot to generate useful feedback statements based on your grading criteria and your rubric, so that you can actually produce quickly helpful and constructive feedback. Maybe if you take notes while you're reading something long, you could get them converted to actionable sentences. I find that not very effective for me, but I think some people have been able to train these products to write like them, and that would be possible. Another thing you could do is to harvest all the feedback that you give across the cohort, and look at anything that's a common picture or a gap that you think there might be, and use that to change the course for next time. That could be something that would be useful to do quickly with one of these products. I don't think they're always accurate doing that, but it doesn't need to be in this case, because you just want to get a general idea of whether or not people are making similar mistakes every time or missing the same things out every time. And we can do that by gut feeling, and we often do, but it could be done quickly in that way. And students, they might be able to take the course syllabus and the learning outcomes and their feedback and ask for a work plan. This can be really useful for students who are neurodivergent, who find it quite difficult to get going with an actionable work plan. Or maybe for all of us, maybe most of us find that difficult. We all find it difficult to manage feedback, generally speaking. So that could be useful for a student to do. Some kind of dialogue with the generative AI product to understand and interpret the feedback could be useful. And again, we need to support the students in doing this. They're not going to get always accurate and relevant feedback in this way, but it can help students to depersonalize the feedback a little bit, and start to move from negative points to action points for them. Obviously they can do that if they upload all of the material, the learning outcomes or the course outline. They can do those things. And they can also compare their feedback and look at patterns and suggestions. And I think it's, in most cases, it's better for students to be able to do this with a teacher, but it's very, very rare that a teacher would have time to do that. So in some universities where there's a really good tutorial system, that could work with a human, but it could also work with one of these products, and then they can go and ask the teacher more pertinent questions. So there are opportunities here that we could see, and I'm glad I'm doing feedback and I didn't have to think about students using these products to produce the assessment covered in previous ones. So some questions for us to get the discussion going. What's most important to you when you give or receive feedback? What are you trying to do? How are you aiming to support improvement? How do you receive feedback so that you can improve yourselves? Do you think what I just suggested was acceptable in terms of generative AI? And what would you like to know more about? And I will put up the references in case you want to photograph them, and then I will stop sharing in a moment.
The references will appear with the slides on the YouTube channel. So
yes, people can stop. Yeah, fine, good. I can stop sharing them.
Okay, thank you very much, Rachel. I'm afraid my well, your technology gave you problems at the beginning, and mine was a little bit unstable during the presentation, but hopefully everybody else was able to hear okay. Please feel free to add questions in the chat. There's a couple of things that I picked up already, Rachel, which I'd like to introduce. Somebody early on, and forgive me, colleagues, for not remembering who wrote what, but somebody talked about the importance of a rubric to provide to students beforehand. What's your thoughts about that?
I think I always recommend having a grading rubric. It helps you to set out in advance what it is that you want, what you're grading for. I mean, that's obvious, I guess, but I still think I don't always see them. I'm working in a university where it's very uncommon to have written criteria. Sorry to anyone in the UK, just don't hear that. And so I think that's really important. So a rubric itself will justify the grade. And what I'm hoping to do with this is to move away from thinking that feedback justifies a grade. I mean, feed forward, which the OU uses in its phrases, is much more a description of how we want things to do. If we want to improve, create improvement, feedback should be doing that. Unfortunately, as a linguistic quirk, feed forward has never really caught on. I don't know why. So I think rubric's really good for justifying the grade, and the language that's in a rubric can be quite helpful to translate into feedback statements. So again, I still also recommend having a bank of statements, and some digital assessment systems will allow that, will allow you to have that, so that you can move students on. The grade's the grade, it's finished. Let's not think about that anymore. What are you going to do next? And it's really difficult if we're focusing on the grade, justifying the grade, to do that. And in many universities, justifying the grade is extremely important. But we need to move away from that and think about feedback as something to help the students to improve. And that's why I link that to trust, because I think if students feel very strongly that everything you do is about helping them to succeed, including giving them feedback, they're much more likely to act on it. From the research there is about what students do. So I don't know where. There was another one that somebody said they don't remember ever having got feedback. So that's interesting.
I remember that there's a university in the UK which shall remain nameless, but they had a campaign on around feedback because universities in the UK didn't score very well in the National Student Survey on the feedback that they were receiving. And they introduced T-shirts for members of staff which said on the back, "This is feedback," which I thought was a very interesting approach. I'm not sure how effective it was.
Yeah, there was a different university which had a little sign that teachers held up, "Stop, now you're getting feedback." But I think these are great examples because it shows us that this is kind of absurd, and what we should be doing is building this relationship so that everybody is aiming for an improvement of some kind, and that it doesn't matter if you don't get there first time, we're still going to help you get there another time. But this is about this trusting relationship, and not such a transactional relationship. Here's the course outline, the learning outcomes and so on, and here's my content, and here's your assignment, and these three things are all separate. They're all mixed together, and the teacher's the person who's going to interpret that for them. I was just reading the little discussion about slop. Yeah, I mean, I don't know where this is going, but 15 years ago, maybe, massive open online courses were going to be it, and we weren't going to have universities anymore, or at least there wasn't going to be any teaching anymore. We're so far from that, and all of the research shows that students want to have relationships with their teachers, and that if we focus on building those, then the rest of it just does fall into place. So I'm still reading the slop discussion. Sorry, I need to move on from that, although it's very good.
It's okay. I wanted to just ask another question, Rachel, which came up from some of the comments in the chat, and that's about, there's a suggestion, I think somebody was quoting Phil Race, that about using the previous year's feedback, collating that and sharing that before the assessment. What's your feeling about that?
I mean, I think anything like that shows that you're paying attention to what happens in your course, and that you care about students succeeding, and that this might help them to succeed next time. And I'm also aware that I'm talking about this in a kind of mildly theoretical way, or slightly idealistic way. However, I think if teachers don't let hope triumph over experience, then they'll very, very quickly become miserable and jaded. So I think it's quite important to try to think about hope. So that's a hopeful thing to do. It's saying, these are mistakes that people made last year, and I want to share them. So,
yeah. I mean, there's a kind of assumption in there that the assessment is going to be same year on year on year. So I think obviously if you're learning about, I don't know, a particular topic, then the learning builds up over time. But I wonder whether what we've been doing is getting a bit lazy as teachers, and not thinking about how can we stretch this further, and maybe AI might be making us do that.
I mean, I think that's possible. I think that's always possible, and my experience really is that generative AI products do show up things that that we already had some problems with. So our problems with those are problems we had already. So I think that we've always used the assessment product as a proxy for the students having learned something. That's always been the case. And right now, that we can't make that assumption anymore. But that doesn't mean that everything we did was wrong. I mean, essays are probably not going to go out of fashion. In some subjects, they're a really good way of showing that students can structure their thoughts. But we do have to focus on the process of how the student wrote the essay, and we have to think really carefully about what was acceptable to us or not. So, I don't think there are no right answers here. There are only context-dependent answers, things that work in your subject area. And our job as teachers is to think about what's working now and what might not work in the future.
Yeah, there's a really interesting question here. Do you see any challenges with AI in relation to student peer feedback? Because students can already be skeptical of each other's feedback and may not fully trust it. And could AI further amplify this mistrust? And so students thinking, oh, it's probably just AI.
Yeah. I think that is potentially problematic for any feedback that we start getting. Also a problem that most generative AI products are quite sycophantic in the way they give, so they don't always write actionable feedback either. They tell people they're doing a good job. We're experimenting with a product called Feedback Fruits. I don't know if anyone here is using that for peer feedback, and it's got an AI that analyzes the feedback and says whether it's good or not. But the problem with that is that it could have been pasted in from a different AI product as well. And a MOOC that I have for teaching staff about generative AI, a massive open online course, which is in the Coursera platform, it had quite a lot of peer review, and it's just become hopeless because either people paste in a great big long thing which is clearly AI generated, or they just write, yeah, great, well done, and it's just meaningless. So again, I think this is something that has to be mediated by the teacher. There has to be a discussion about peer feedback, why we do it, and people have to trust each other to do it as a human and not do it as a AI. But I will also say that I think a lot of students use these products to take shortcuts, sure, but sometimes they use the product because they're lacking in confidence. They don't feel that they're trusted. They don't feel that they can do this themselves. So this is where we have to focus much of our attention.
Yeah.
And then peer feedback would work.
Yeah. There was a question earlier around whether AI was better for formative or summative assessment, which I thought was an interesting question.
Yes. And it says people's thoughts and not just my thoughts as well. So yeah, I think I don't think there's a difference in I don't think there's a difference. All feedback should be to encourage or to support improvement, whether it's formative or summative. So I don't think there's any difference. I would find it quite hard to use it on a high level, but somebody mentioned a black box down here, and I think that's pretty important. So I think, sorry, I was just scrolling down. So there's the black box problem, but someone else said they've been encouraged, to use generative AI to provide feedbacks on essays. And I think it's a really dangerous way to go for us. So either we say human in the loop, and if you're going to be the human in the loop of this process, you have got to read the work. Otherwise, how are you going to, or look at it, whatever format it's in, how are you going to know whether the AI was accurate or not? So you might as well do it yourself in the first place and be honest about it. So that was for the case of workload. Someone further up the thread said about it being more consistent. Humans are inconsistent in marking and giving feedback. There's plenty of research to show that. We don't really know what's going on in these systems. It is a black box. And so I think outsourcing grading and feedback to basically some software is extremely problematic from a relationships point of view and a trust point of view. And so I'm not happy with it. However, there might be situations like we've used digital marking with multiple choice questions for years, and we don't worry too much about that. We assume that the human will check the questions at the beginning. That's why we are okay with that. So I think these are really problematic areas, and they need to be discussed at a disciplinary level, because the answer that I have about it, who currently works in the social science area, might not be the same as somebody working in a pure science for a lot of good reasons. So I think I have a lot of thoughts about it, and I think that people need to come to their own decisions. But being told to use it because it's going to save time is probably going to be very problematic. That always is problematic in a teaching relationship.
Yeah, there's quite a few comments here on the human in the loop, which is great. I just spotted one question which has received a bit of attention, and that's whether if students are using Gen AI to support writing their assignments and educators are using them to generate feedback, are we in danger of having an AI to AI communication loop?
Yeah, I think that is a danger. And again, there might be situations where we are okay with this. Maybe when you're learning the theory for your driving test, it's quite a constrained amount of information. The answers are going to be factual. Maybe this is okay. But higher education is about developing critical thinking skills and demonstrating that you have those and that you're able to deal with new problems using different information. I just don't think those things can work. So students probably are not learning anything in that situation, and teachers not doing anything. So what's the point of it? So we're all losing our will to work. We're all losing the will to live as well. But I think it is potentially very problematic for society if that's how we start to see higher education, or compulsory education as well. But I do think there might be situations which are very specific. I mean, language learning could be another one, but as a late life language learner myself, I find that apps are really limiting. I can improve my vocabulary, that's fine, but I cannot understand the context of conversations without talking to people. And so I think there are some very limited areas where this could happen, and we won't be too worried about it. We might be worried about the student part of it on the driving test. True. But we're going to examine that under constrained conditions. So, yeah, I think it is, but we have to keep talking about it. We can't despair of ourselves. We have to keep some hope going that what we want to do here, which is help students learn, overrides everything else, and we won't take stupid decisions about it. But that's not to say that a decision in one context is not the same decision. Might be not stupid in a different context. So we just have to talk about it. Human judgment here. This is what higher education is all about, human judgment.
Yeah. There's a point here from Marina saying that HE is already being treated more like a financial transaction than a learning activity. I'm not going to expect you to go into that, Rachel. It's a bit political and very problematic, but it is interesting in the context of the Gen AI tools and the amount of money that they're generating for those who are already in positions of power.
Yeah, I agree totally. I mean, I work thinking about generative AI in education because I feel I have to. I don't have the luxury of looking away from this at all. But I think from a societal point of view, this is hugely problematic, and the cost in terms of resources as well needs to be taken into account. But we need to think about that with everything we do. There are other situations where we use resources without really thinking about them. But yeah, ed tech's always been like that. Educational technology, we buy more and more educational technology. We have less and less money for teachers. Is this really where we want to go? And again, the decisions need to be taken quite locally, but often they're not discussed locally. So decisions are taken, somewhere else in the university, and teachers are dealing with the consequences of it. So that of course, that's something that we have to think about. I'm going to pick up Peter's comment here that students can feel let down in online communities because their work's not being assessed carefully. I think this is a really good point in distance education, because it's challenging to build a close relationship with teachers in that environment, with students in that environment, in any situation. So perhaps it's better to spend time to allow the students to use online materials to learn things, but to have all the discussions about the work and keeping that in. And human in the loop has to mean something, and not just check that it looks reasonably okay and then tick it off, which, as people have said in the thread, can be how it feels to use some of these systems to test them. They all need a lot of work, as someone else has said. And we, vice chancellors, rectors, they are being approached all the time by quite slick educational technology marketers, I'm always being asked to look at something because the rector saw it at a conference and it was, it was really great. And the rector hasn't taught a class for a long time, so we do need to try and push back as much as we can on these things.
Yeah. As Julie pointing out that the gym analogy is still useful in that we used to say it was like buying a membership rather than a product. You still had to put in the work. But now we add that using AI is like paying the membership and asking someone else to lift the weights, which is an interesting perception. But that puts me in mind of when most of our audience is probably far too young to remember but in the days before calculators, you had to know how to add up, subtract, you had to know your times tables, and then calculators come in and they became something that everybody could use, and there was big debates about should you allow people to use calculators in an exam, or should we be testing people's mental arithmetic, and we don't even ask about things like that anymore. We don't ask about we encourage people to use spell checkers. We encourage people to use Grammarly. So this is another tool that maybe we haven't got to grips with properly yet.
I think that's I think taking the calculator back a stage, my first degree is in physics, and we didn't have calculators. Oh, we must have had calculators. Maybe we didn't. They were around. We weren't allowed to use them. We had to use log tables, which is a book of things where you look up different relationships. So if you're too young to know what they are, you don't need to know what they are. And that's completely gone. Then we got scientific calculators, and it did those things for us. And we didn't need to do that. But I mean, children at school still learn to do basic arithmetic. It's the more complex things that have been removed. But in our focus groups, we had someone who said they say to their students, "Well, use generative AI. Don't bring a forklift to my gym," which is like going a step further from asking someone else to lift the weights for you. So let's just bring a big machine in and crash into the gym. So I think we need to explain that to students, why it's important. Why do I want you to do this? Why do I think this will help you learn something? I just think we have never not had to do that because we've had examinations as a proxy and assessments as a proxy. Doesn't work anymore, but students still want to do work mostly that I talk to. Maybe they're a subset. They do want to do that, and they want us to explain why things are important to them. But all the research on cheating shows that students will take a shortcut if they run out of time, don't understand what to do very well, think everyone else is doing it, thinks the teacher doesn't care. That's also quite important. So we're fighting back against that. But we were before. Students have had ways to take shortcuts forever. So it's not new either.
True. And
by the way, I forgot. We said we were going to do a Menti, and I've just converted it to, if I can figure it out how to do that, I'll just convert it to a link. You can do it in your own time. But the idea was to give you some examples of using generative AI in feedback, but because of my technical problems, I thought we ran out of time for doing it. Okay, Peter's put quite a few questions, or a question in here. We don't know enough about this yet. I don't think, Pitar, sorry. We don't know enough about the impact, but it's looking as though it might have an impact on skills acquisition. So from a teaching point of view, we have to let students work on their skills without using AI. And that might mean doing things in a classroom situation where AI isn't allowed. And that could be quite difficult with distance courses. So we need to support students in learning to learn without these products. It's already becoming a problem after 3.5 years. We need to get them to practice things in different ways, and making things fun and interesting can really help with that. So things they want to do anyway. Most students want to learn. They don't come just to get a qualification. I know there will be some, but mostly they don't. So we need to get them going. Yes, Elizabeth, at radiologist skills, that's been one that has been a big area because they were very first, not generative AI, but AI machine learning tools to read cell whatever radiologists read to look at images, and they're pretty good at it. Machine learning can be trained really well to do this, and radiologists have reportedly lost skills doing this. So this will be the same for all of us. But we'll find new ways to deal with this.
Yeah, I think there might be a problem with the link for the Mentimeter.
Not working.
Rachel. I
Sorry,
think Marina
is it
said
my
it's
link? It should be presenting. Okay, just give me 2 seconds. I will sort that out because we. Oh, yeah, I think you're right.
Oh,
Sorry.
it has worked for some. It's okay. Rebecca said it's worked for her, so sorry. I haven't actually tried it. Sorry, I was trying to keep an eye on the chat.
We try to do too many things at once, right? This one should work. Sorry, guys.
Okay.
Just for fun.
Has anybody got a burning question that they feel hasn't been answered? Because Rachel and I have only just been able to sample the chat. If anybody does want to, if they want to raise their hand. I can't see any.
About if you'd be offended if generative AI was used. When I've asked students about how would you feel if teachers used AI to mark your work, and one student shouted out in front of a very large group of people, "I would sue the university if that happened."
Here you go. Elizabeth Avery has got her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. It's just really a question about that ongoing tension between, the fact that there are some benefits from using Gen AI, but a lot of students, are very wary and a bit hostile about it being used. And and I'd just be interested in knowing how people are approaching that with their students. Like, are there sort of statements that are given in module guidebooks, for example, about the ways in which AI is and isn't being used in the feedback process, and how are students reacting to that? I find that really helpful. Thank you.
Can't answer that directly because I haven't. I don't work directly with students, but if anyone else has any experiences, that would be great.
We did some. I worked with Linda Amram Cooper and Stilianos and Alan Tate on a paper where we were exploring both teacher and students' attitudes to AI in HE, and the students were that they had a very interesting take on what academic integrity was. They felt that when we just talk about it as being plagiarism, they rather think about it as being something that's the academic integrity is what creates the academic community that you're becoming part of. And so they really didn't like the idea that that other students might be gaining an advantage in using a tool when they either don't use it or they use it in a particular way. And I think that's come out in quite a lot of the literature so far. I see Ali has a hand up. Ali, do you want to come in with your question? We are going to have to close this part of the session soon, but Ali?
Just to comment on the policies, we at York, what we've done is we put a policy structure together in terms of how we actually address use of AI. So we actually put a table in the assessment documentation that tells you what AI usage is allowed, how it's implemented, how it's put forward. It's done by a group of people led by Professor Nadine Training, Dr. Nadine Training, and Carolyn Schaefer, and a group of people here. And we developed a framework where you tell the student exactly what kind of AI is allowed to be used, how it's implemented, and it's a traffic light system, so kind of blue, green, red, and clear indication in the assessment documentation, and during any preparation that's done for assessment documentation that tells them exactly how they can use AI. In terms of feedback, where AI is used, you have to actually tell people. There's no clear guidance on that. For me, personally, because I've designed modules that actually teach AI in a social context, in the management context, and tell people how to use that as a human tool. We use feedback of AI, and we get them to put action logs together where they're using AI. So from that, what we find is being transparent in what's and very clear in what's used and what you can use, how you can implement it, how you can put it forward is really important, rather than and actually being very, very clear on what the usage is and how it's put forward. And the other thing is just assessment design. The assessments are redesigned as much as possible to be able to deal with that, and that's the kind of thing that we're working with. Is that if you're going to use AI or you have the threat of AI being used, be very clear of how your assessment is designed and how we put forward the communication with students in terms of what they can use and what they can't use.
Thank you. Thanks, Sally, for that. I think somebody commented earlier on the fact that not all universities have policies, and should be thinking about getting around to it.